Eyebrows so pale they fade into my pallid skin, void of melanin. Freckles refuse to make an appearance in harsh British weather north of the wall, where winter isn't coming because it never even left. Bleach, 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 the mean girls crow during recess. Persecution, it doesn't exclude this white princess, but if they dare step close enough, they might just see something etched in this otherwise featureless face. Defiant girl. Makeup is cheap for shoplifters from low-income families, easy to slip cherry blossom lipstick down elastic waistband, or tuck glittering eyeshadow down double-A bra as contraband, or grab complimentary mascara to wave magic wand over albino lashes just so I might stand a chance at nabbing a boy for weekend pashes. Hot property is all the rage at school. Everybody does it, and only the stupid get caught. And even if I did end up in handcuffs, the old bill would be lenient on a first-time offender like me. Yet still, like with my empty hands in my pockets, because I'm a good girl. Peer pressure from all angles to paint my face, elbows digging into my sides as we spill from the classrooms to the halls. Bleach, bleach, bleach. The chant is a ritual from witches trying to cast their ugly spell potent enough to break me into suicide hell, to turn me into a pretty mannequin and make tears gush from dead eyes. But a fringe benefit of no makeup, no cherry blossom lipstick, no glittering quadrant of eyeshadow, no magic mascara wand, there's no streaks down these cheeks. But they don't succeed. I am an unwavering girl. Each morning I get out of bed raring to learn English, science, geography, maths, music, history, religion, humanities. A grade equals a one-way ticket to anywhere other than here. The world is my oyster. But first, I must endure detention. Yeah, even suspension after the main tormentor receives my fist to her face just before badminton practice. Retaliation lowered me to her standard. That's right. I'm a bad girl. Her eye turns a deep shade of purple. My face abolishes red, angry blotches, returning to unblemished, pale complexion. Bleach, bleach, bleach. The headmaster, he summons us to his office, makes us stand to attention, furious we created this unnecessary tension. The cane quivers in his palm as he lectures us with patronizing psalm. He demands we apologize to one another because he doesn't have time to deal with this trivial bother. Head hung low, she mumbles, sorry. My head held high, I retaliate loud and clear. Even though violence doesn't pay, and there's always a better hand that you can play than the fist. It's hard not to feel satisfied with finally taking her to town and turning her smug smile upside down. I am a liberated girl. I walked out of there. It never once looked back. It didn't need to. There was no monkey on my back. Now I fight this anti-bullying war. A fist as a missile is needed no more. Now I use a pen and paper to fight for what's right. Hope I've done enough with this poem for you to think about it tonight. But if not, that's okay. Because I'm a big girl now. Thank you very much.
Give it up once more for Kelly Van Nelson. Fantastic chapter, Kelly. Thank you so much. And while you're in the mood for clapping, I know I just want to say thank you for all of you for sticking around, and I think we should all give Martin Mordew a big clap too. Mark's done so much work in this area, so thank you. I was thinking about, as we introduce this next discussion on breaking the news, changing our media, that in fact we've kind of been through a discussion this afternoon where you drew out a theme in a way of fear, exclusion and censorship. We live in a strange world, and I think we've got three people who are going to tell us some pretty interesting stories about that. I'm not sure which order they want to come up. I know we're running short of time, but perhaps I'll just introduce Sonya first up. Sonya Voumard is a non-fiction writer, journalist and teacher, and her novel Political Animals was set in the Canberra Press Gallery. Her non-fiction books are The Media and the Massacre and Skin in the Game, The Pleasure and Pain of Telling True Stories. Sonya, if you'd like to share your story with us right now, you can sit down and grab a microphone. Sonya Voumard, everyone.
Thanks very much. Great to be here, and I really applaud Mark's great achievement in getting this happening. It's been a wonderful day full of fabulous energy and friendly sentiment. So, all power to Mark and to the Addi Road Community Centre. It's just been fabulous. I didn't realise that we were going to sort of do this in any other way than a Q&A, so I'm kind of just going to be talking off the top of my head. And I was mucking around in some of my old files just before when I realised that it's going to be like this. And I came across a quote by the American writer Janet Malcolm. And anyone who knows Janet Malcolm will probably think that it's the one about, journalists being so powerful that they, betray their subjects. And in fact, it is about that, but it's not the best known of those quotes. The quote is that she said to journalists, "We're certainly not a helping profession. If we help anyone, it's ourselves to what our subjects don't realise they're letting us take." She says, "I am hardly the first writer to notice the not niceness of journalists." And I find myself at a sort of critical juncture of thought about the profession that I've had for 40 years, and that is that on the one hand, I've been very critical of the ethics of many journalists, and even, critical of some of my own practices in the past. But we're also at a stage where, because of social media, because of the concentration of what is called mainstream media, although I question whether that will continue to be the case for a while, the very practice of journalism is, and the existence of journalism has somehow found itself in question. When Mark was talking about when he was working on designing this session, one of the things we spoke about was how do we penetrate fake news in the media today? And I just kind of jotted down a few points, and I said, by teaching people scepticism and critical thinking, by making people interested in and concerned for the world that they live in, by mastering the tools of information amplification, and importantly, by encouraging investment in humanities degrees. So I actually think that education is one of the keys to ensuring that good journalism and good thought continues in societies, because without it, people can't critically analyse and they can't look at evidence-based or non-evidence-based stories. So that's really, I won't hog the show any longer. I want to hand over to, I think probably Wendy Bacon as the next person to say something, and I'll happily dip in later.
I'm not sure.
Could I take the question?
Yes.
Did you want to ask some question?
We'll do it here. Okay. I think, I'm not sure if Wendy needs a lot of introduction, particularly for people of my age, but because Wendy's been writing for a terribly long time, back at the National Times when I first came across Wendy's name, but she's former Professor of Journalism at UTS and Director of the Australian Centre for Independent Journalism. And Wendy's interested in developing citizen journalism and freelancers for the City Hub and her own blog, wendybacon.com. Wendy, take it away.
Thanks, Cole, and congratulations, Mark, and everybody else who's been involved in this event. And yes, I guess I see myself as a journalist still, and I've really been seeing myself that way for more than 50 years. So I've kind of been in a great big circle, very much beginning in alternative journalism. Some of my things were underground papers, tiny rodeo magazines of alternative news, posters. Then I did go into the mainstream for a whole while, and including things like 60 Minutes, which was a pretty interesting experience, and now really back at the end of that, and I hope to keep going for a while. My latest journalism is on my blog today, and I'll just come back to that in a minute. Look, of course, we're here today on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to them, and therefore I would like to start by saying, look, we may feel sometimes we're in a pretty grim place, and we are in world and global terms, we are in a very grim place. But the silence that continued for so many decades around the violence against Aboriginal people is perhaps one of our biggest, and should continue to be one of our biggest media concerns. And shortly on my blog, I'm going to publish something which is more about 50 years of media coverage of deaths in custody. But last week we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the Royal Commission of Deaths in Custody. And of course, that was like a fairly major media event. And media events tend to be a way of organising the news. That's not something that's decades old. But you know, the 30th anniversary meant it was on the ABC, The Guardian, Nine Media, and you've got a lot on the ABC. Do not assume that most Australians heard about it. I did a bit of a check on a database on the biggest media company in Australia, News Corp Australia, and there was almost no mention of it at all, except for an attack on the First Nations Senator Lydia Thorpe and Marine Faruqi, the first Green Senator, the first Muslim woman, the second Muslim woman to be in Parliament. And it was an attack on them for daring to say that Prince Philip might have been a racist and there was more important things to talk about than him. So that warranted an attack. So that was a huge thing last week. So just this week we've had two things. We've had another death in custody, which I think almost very few who here knew that another First Nations person had died in custody this week.
There's been two.
Yeah, has there been two? And there was also, sorry, I didn't know that, and also a major inquest in South Australia where a First Nations prisoner got pulled from his cell and put in a van, shackled and put in a van, and was unconscious by the time he was taken out of the van and died shortly afterwards. So now the silence around those issues we have to break through it. And you know, I always believe very strongly in what we call alternative journalism. It's just another form of journalism. You know, I believe that every attempt at a story, wherever it's posted, however small it is if it's an attempt to tell the truth using sort of recognisable things like checking facts and that sort of thing, which I do believe in, I think it is very worthwhile. I think if you say you're a journalist, you've got a really strong ethical obligation to do everything you can to strive for accuracy. And we can't go into that now, what I mean by accuracy, but that's very easy these days because you can do your best and then you can say, let me know and I'll immediately correct it if I'm wrong. So look, I don't think there's very much time here to go on and on about this, but I just thought I'd ask, my final comment is how many people in this room know that thousands of people living in Rudy Hill, Minchinbury, Erskine Park have been suffering for about 2 months really serious odours to the extent that they have breathing difficulties, itchy eyes, all that sort of thing. How many people here know that? So yeah, a few people know that, but many do not know that. Now, one of the really big problems is the way our media, first of all, there is almost no local journalism, and that's why I do local journalism for Sydney Hub as often as I can. It's an independent publication that's lasted a while. It finally broke through that story onto 2GB and Channel 7, and I think one story on the Sydney Morning Herald, but it will disappear. Meanwhile, there are breaches of conditions, penalty notices imposed, they don't work, and yesterday the Minister for Environment, Susan Ley, was at the opening of a major extension of the landfill, major facility out there that's actually causing the problems, along with the head of the EPA. The ex-head of the EPA is actually on there. The Bingo board, and Bingo is the company. So look, that is a pretty complex story, as you probably guess. And so the last few days I've been working on a blog post which I've done this afternoon. I've got to correct a few typos, but it's on there on wendybacon.com. Why have I done that? I've done that because I actually think the truth matters. But I think if you're stuck out of Minchinbury and you're working very, very hard, trying to probably pay off a house that you can barely afford, worrying about its property values, which is a horrible system in which we're currently living, and you don't have any journalists there that can actually do the digging, Well, I think there is a huge capacity for those of us who are older and retired journalists to do some of that digging, to check our facts, which does mean bearing down into some very complex documents. They can all be reduced to pretty simple things in the end. And that's what I mean by citizen journalism. And I always think it's been around, and one of the ideas I've got is that, and I have tried it before, and of course it's just another form of journalism teaching, but actually doing workshops with people to teach the basic skills, because really anyone pretty much can do it if they're able to read and check things, that sort of thing is something. And last year, for commissioned by GetUp, also the link to that's on my blog, there was about 25 volunteers, many of them people my age or a bit younger, who did 3 months analysis of News Corp coverage of climate change. It was commissioned by GetUp, but we did it independently, and what it revealed is that the major media company in Australia has been, it's actually for more than 2 decades, systematically lying to the people of Australia about climate change. And we all know that, but we've actually got the figures to prove it. So on that note, I'll just say that we've got a huge amount of citizen journalism to do to break through. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. I've been inspired by the thought, Wendy, I do citizen journalism on Radio Skid Row.
Yeah,
I know there are many of us who do that as well. So, moving right along, Ian Keldoulis is from the home. Well, he's from Australia really, but he's visiting home. But his place of residence for many years has been the home of fake news, or at least the term. Ian's been written for the New York Times, New York Magazine and Harper's Bazaar, and until recently he was the New York correspondent for Sydney's neighbourhood paper. Ian Keldoulis, welcome.
I had put on my bio that I had also worked in advertising, which sort of seems a little sacrilegious today on May Day. But it's a very important point that I wanted to make, as we were discussing here, the sort of shrinking power of journalism and, of course, this sort of slander of fake news. And I did put a few little facts together. Unfortunately, my phone has gone off. But one of the key things that's happened is the advertising that supports journalism has now dried up and gone into the digital media instead. So we used to say at the New York Times, that you're writing your story on the back of an ad. And which was literally true. You saw the advertising people went out, they sold the ads, we knew how many pages would be in the newspaper, we knew the next day that we would have so many columns that we would run because there was that much advertising, right? Quite simple. Now, we're looking at digital media in America. 63% of the ad spend is in digital media. And close to 70% of all the US digital ad spend is on 3 platforms. It's on Google, Facebook, and Amazon, right? So all of that money that used to go into journalism really isn't going there anymore. It's going elsewhere. That's one huge issue, right? But the way that I think that we're looking at all of this stuff is we're kind of looking at trying to solve these problems through the wrong lens of the telescope and the wrong side of the telescope. Because what we're looking at now is the instant gratification age meeting our storytelling capacity, right? So today has been a day where people are talking about the power and value of storytelling, which is vital and very important, and I think part of our DNA. That's how we process things and have done for probably 1 million years, is to tell stories to one another. But we're now in an era where the attention span has shrunk to virtually zero. Now, I still work in advertising. I'm hoping I can join Advertising Anonymous at some point and actually quit. But I'm working on some ads at the moment that will be running on the LinkedIn platform. And the guidelines for those ads, I'm not kidding, tell you that the average time the ad will spend in front of a viewer is 1 second. Okay? That's what you're competing for attention on that level, right? So how do we solve that problem? And I don't think we solve that problem seriously by concentrating on the content and having governments tell us, we need to serve this type of content, we need to prohibit that stuff. We need to really understand what it is that we're using these days to access that information. And I think that's something that we kind of gloss over. Now, I just sort of want to get a raise of hands from the audience here. My guess that the median age of this audience is probably above 40, let's just say that. How many people in this audience have asked someone younger to explain to them how to use something on their phone? Just raise your hand. Okay. How many young people have come up to you and asked you, how do I do something on my phone? Okay, at least a few. So that's really, to me, a very, very significant thing, because this thing has only been around in its current form for about 10 years, right? And we talk about this as though, it's a really smart thing to have in your pocket, right? It's a small computer that you're walking around with, which is true. But what it is, it's a small computer that's now been basically designed to be a really, really smart poker machine. And that's how we're using it. One of the things I like about living in New York, or I used to like about living in New York, and I'm not going to complain about the gentrification and all that sort of stuff. We've got my friend David Wales here that can do that. What I used to like about living in New York in particular is you could walk into a bar, you'd sit down on a bar stool, you didn't know anybody, you'd get a drink, and the next thing you know, you'd be having a conversation with the person next to you. And that to me was one of the really most joyous things about living in New York. Now you go into a bar, and what do? Everybody is sitting there, and the first thing they do is they look on their phone. And now, the reason they're doing that is because this is basically a behaviourist-driven device. You're now kind of conditioned to the response that you get. It's an immediate gratification. I don't even care what's happening on my phone. I'm even just looking at it now going, did I get an email? Did I get this? Is there some little red light that I should click on? We all need to kind of sit back for a minute and go, wow, what is this device actually doing to us? Why is it that happening? Why am I reacting to it like that? And as we were saying earlier, this is a really important educational thing. Now, I never got an instruction manual with my phone. I mean, there's something online to look at, right? Whoever does. Which is why we have young people, so they can explain it to us. But seriously, we need to start getting young people to understand what it is that they are actually doing, what the behaviour around the phone that's developed, and how they're accessing all the media, how they're accessing all of this stuff, because it's all emotionally driven. You're getting a response, you're getting the most aggressive stories, you're getting the most provocative things served to you, because those are the things that you're responding to. And until we start to unwind that particular behavioural loop, I don't think we're going to solve the problem from the content point. That's all my thought for today.
We are very conscious of the time, but we've also got three really great people here with us this afternoon. I would love to throw up to the audience. We've really got 5 minutes. Sonya and I were talking before earlier this afternoon about the kind of freedom that people like Wendy enjoyed with the National Times back in the early 80s, which was about part of the question we're looking at here this afternoon, that complex narrative. And I guess Ian's explained one of the reasons why we don't get it. I'm wondering if Sonya and indeed Wendy and Ian have any thoughts about where to. I mean, I know you both. Let's hand it to Sonya.
Well, I was just going to go where from before I went where to. I mean, in the days when we had the National Times, which was, in my opinion, one of the most inspiring newspapers that will have existed in my lifetime. I think we had a very benevolent newspaper owner in the form of Fairfax, who understood that there was a university-educated cohort of people who wanted to critique society, you know, post-war, I mean, loosely speaking, post-war, and gave the freedom, I suppose, the carte blanche to a degree for that critique of society to happen. However, I would also point out that all newspaper organisations and media organisations have been owned and run by elites, and let's not get too sort of dewy-eyed about the fact that any of them were necessarily right-minded. I mean, often they were sort of fighting their family battles against each other, whether it was the Packers and the Fairfaxes or whatever. So sometimes good journalism came out of those battles, and you know, unfortunately, that kind of space to play has sort of ceased to exist, and so we don't have that kind of funded journalism that perhaps we used to. Am I allowed to just quickly segue over into what's happening in Canberra before we wind up here? So I worked as a journalist in Canberra in 1991 in the Hawke Keating era, and so what is happening in Canberra now is very interesting to me because I wrote my novel Political Animals, which came out in 2005, based on or inspired by my experiences as a journalist there. And it was always a life of excess for both the journalists and the politicians. And so I'm not surprised at the avalanche of sexual harassment issues and events of sexual wrongdoing that are coming out of Canberra right now. But what is interesting is the wide public exposure of that behaviour. Canberra journalists have traditionally reflected in broad terms the patriarchal and even the authoritarian nature of the place, sexist, hierarchical, male-dominated. The demeaning sexist commentary about Michelle Grattan, the legendary female political journalist who made her name on the Age in the 70s, is a case in point. A month ago, an AFR journalist called Aaron Patrick, and I'll say his name again, Aaron Patrick, wrote that the Prime Minister Scott Morrison was caught in a crusade by women journalists. This rightly outraged many of them and us. He said their angry coverage often strayed into unapologetic activism by the new female media leadership. He named Laura Tingle, Louise Milligan, Catherine Murphy and Amy Remarkis, among others. These women journalists are not crusading, they're covering stories, legitimate stories that have exposed widespread sexual abuse and possibly criminal conduct allegations, mainly perpetrated against young women. And they reveal a toxic culture supported or unchallenged for years by many men in Parliament House. Though seemingly worse now, this has been a problem for decades. I worked with some of those same women as a young journalist in the early 90s in Canberra, and I'm certain most of them would have experienced serious sexism, as I did myself, more than once in the corridors of Parliament House. It's also true to say, though, that one of the ways to get ahead was to befriend those sexist, powerful men. So I'm just very glad that I don't have to work there now as a young woman. And I also point out the immoral practice of political staffers' background against women who complained about sexual abuse in these stories being taken up by male journalists. So that's really my rant. I wanted to get that out. And now I'll hand back to Wendy.
We're going to Ian and Wendy will sum up.
Okay. Julia Gillard, hello, come on.
So,
We never talked about her, she was treated terribly.
I agree.
So when I arrived in Australia, which was the middle of March, it was kind of like deja vu for me. I left New York, and there was a sort of sex scandal with the governor in New York, covering all the media over there. And then I arrived in Australia, and then there's all this going on in Parliament House as well. So, for me, what I think is really interesting is we seem to be at a moment where people's tolerance for all kinds of things has really just hit zero. And I think that's a fantastic moment in history. We saw huge uprisings in America last year over the police violence. I think we're at a very interesting point where things like community journalism that aren't funded the way that I was talking before can actually break through because they do touch on a very deep and emotional level to people in their communities. And I think that is one of the ways that we can kind of unwind the situation that I was talking about before. I do think one of the key things for us is to think about, how does the news affect us emotionally? Because that's the way that people are going to respond immediately before they think about things rationally. And I just want to sort of leave that thought that if we start thinking about all of this information that we're getting, how is it affecting us in a non-rational way, then we might start getting somewhere.
Look, I very much agree with most of the other things that have been said too. And just in response to what Sonya has said, raising the really important issue of the coverage of sexual harassment everywhere. But I think what's sort of different about it, Sonya, is that this time the women journalists, all of those ones you've named, have sort of stuck together and defended each other. And when Erin Patrick came out and launched an assault, there was kind of a real reaction. I think that's really different because there's sort of a lot in the culture of, journalism tends to be a very competitive thing. And also because people are organised in media companies very often with a few outsiders, that doesn't happen very much. And the other thing I thought was different, and I really welcome it, is that there's this whole kind of illusion that, somehow journalism is in this neutral space, which it never has been. There's always undervalue underpinnings. But the women journalists and everybody who was supporting them seemed to come out and say, there is a value here. We do not support sexual harassment of women, and we are going to campaign with our stories against that. And I think I'd like to see that happen more, actually, to break through that sort of false, really false neutrality. And look, I also think that the issues about how people are using phones, social media, and also, it might sound like I've got serious illusions about how much time people can spend reading an article, and of course they don't. And all those stats about people, if you know your own stats on a website, they'll probably mean that no one's been on it more than a minute or something. But nevertheless, I do sort of believe that probably if a story like community journalism is relevant to people's interests, in a broad sense, all different sorts of ways. It might be like Addison Road is going to be shut down or something, so everyone really wants to know everything about Addison Road. Then people will focus. Now, maybe a few will then post a short ad or do a great poster or something like that. So I see it all as a process and everything interlinking with everything else. I think that's all I can say at this point.
Thank you very much to Sonya Voumard, Keldoulis and Wendy Bacon. It's a conversation that can go on and on, but do support, I say, Addison Road Community Centre. They are part of the hub here tonight. And on another conversation at a time, Radio Skid Row, the City Hub, there are so many places you can get alternative news from. I think we're going to hand back to Mark. Mark, are we doing Samuel Watson?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're on that.